Jimmy Hoffa is at the center of one of the most notable unsolved missing person cases in America. The famed and powerful labor leader in the early 70s went missing on July 30th in 1975. And if you're familiar with the case, you know that on this day, his body has never been found, and authorities haven't agreed on an explanation for what actually happened. This Live Now and Then special takes a look back at Hoffa's disappearance and the rise of his notoriety.
On a sweltering July afternoon in 1975, Jimmy Hoffa vanished without a trace from the parking lot of the Mattress Red Fox restaurant in suburban Detroit. In an instant, the former Teamsters president, once one of the most powerful men in America, became the subject of America's most enduring mystery. For nearly 5 decades, the question, "Where is Jimmy Hoffa?" has haunted investigators, fascinated the public, and spawned countless theories. But recent developments, including groundbreaking forensic techniques and new witness testimonies, may have finally brought us to the threshold of solving this infamous case. Are we about to close the book on one of America's most notorious disappearances, or is the truth about Hoffa's fate destined to remain buried forever? That fateful day, July 30th, 1975, began like any other for the 62-year-old former Union leader. Hoffa told his wife he was heading out to meet 2 men, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a Detroit mobster, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamster official with known mob connections. The meeting was set for 2:20 p.m. at the Mattress Red Fox, a popular suburban Detroit restaurant. When Hoffa failed to return home that evening, his wife Josephine became worried it was completely out of character for her punctual husband. By nightfall, she had contacted Hoffa's closest allies, who began making calls. His green Pontiac Granville was found unlocked in the restaurant parking lot, but of Jimmy Hoffa, there was no sign, no blood, no signs of struggle, just a disturbing absence where one of America's most recognizable labor leaders should have been. The disappearance immediately dominated headlines nationwide. This wasn't just any missing person case. This was Jimmy Hoffa, the man who had built the International Brotherhood of Teamsters into a juggernaut with nearly 2 million members. The man who had stood toe-to-toe with Kennedy brothers and presidents alike. The man who, despite his recent prison sentence, remained a force to be reckoned with in both labor and underworld circles. The initial investigation moved with unprecedented speed. Within 24 hours, the FBI had taken charge, recognizing the national significance of the case. Agents fanned out across Detroit, interviewing restaurant staff, potential witnesses, and known associates. Both Giacalone and Provenzano claimed they never had plans to meet Hoffa that day. Giacalone was allegedly at a nearby athletic club, while Provenzano was reportedly playing cards in New Jersey. A witness reported seeing Hoffa leave the restaurant parking lot in a maroon Mercury with several unidentified men, but this lead, like so many others that would follow, evaporated under scrutiny. As days turned into weeks, the silence surrounding Hoffa's whereabouts grew deafening. His family appeared on national television pleading for information, any information about what had happened to their patriarch. Who was Jimmy Hoffa? To understand why Hoffa's disappearance created such a seismic shock, we need to grasp who this man was and the controversial path he had carved through American labor history. Born in 1913 to a coal driller in Indiana, Jimmy Hoffa's early life was marked by hardship after his father died when he was just 7. By age 14, he had dropped out of school to work full-time, eventually landing at a Detroit grocery warehouse where his legendary career began. It was there, incensed by poor working conditions, that a teenage Hoffa organized his first labor strike and won. This early victory revealed his exceptional talent for organization and negotiation, setting him on a trajectory that would transform both the Teamsters Union and the American labor movement as a whole. By the 1950s, Hoffa had risen to become the national vice president of the Teamsters, and in 1957 he claimed the presidency of what was then America's largest union. Under his leadership, the Teamsters membership swelled to nearly 2 million workers. He negotiated the first national trucking agreement, dramatically improving wages and working conditions for drivers across America. To blue-collar workers, Hoffa was nothing short of a hero, a street-smart fighter who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty to protect their interests. But Hoffa's methods were controversial at best and criminal at worst. His willingness to partner with organized crime figures gave the Teamsters unprecedented leverage, allowing them to shut down businesses that refused to cooperate with the union's demands. The Teamsters' pension fund under Hoffa's control became known as the Bank of the Mob, financing countless casinos, hotels, and other developments tied to organized crime families. This unholy alliance made Hoffa a prime target for Robert Kennedy, who was chief counsel to the Senate Labor Rackets Committee and later, as Attorney General, made it his personal mission to bring down the Teamsters' president. After years of investigation, Kennedy's Department of Justice finally secured Hoffa's conviction in 1964 on charges of jury tampering and fraud. In 1967, Hoffa began serving a 13-year prison sentence. Yet even behind bars, Hoffa maintained his grip on the Teamsters, running the union through loyal intermediaries. President Richard Nixon commuted his sentence in 1971 with a curious stipulation: Hoffa was barred from union activities until 1980. This restriction infuriated the former leader, who immediately began maneuvering to regain control of his beloved Teamsters, challenging the leadership of his former protege and successor, Frank Fitzsimmons. The original investigation and dead ends. The FBI's investigation into Hoffa's disappearance quickly became one of the largest in Bureau history, eventually filling more than 200 volumes with reports, interviews, and leads. Special Agent Robert Garrity led the initial investigation, working alongside a team of agents who understood the explosive political nature of the case. FBI Director Clarence Kelly himself took a personal interest, receiving daily briefings on the hunt for America's missing labor leader. From the beginning, investigators focused on Hoffa's complicated relationship with organized crime. The working theory was straightforward. Hoffa's attempts to regain control of the Teamsters threatened the mob's comfortable arrangement with Frank Fitzsimmons. Unlike the confrontational Hoffa, Fitzsimmons gave crime families easy access to the union's massive pension fund while demanding little oversight, a relationship worth killing to protect. The primary suspects quickly emerged. Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, the Detroit mob enforcer who supposedly arranged the meeting; Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, the New Jersey Teamster official and made member of the Genovese crime family who allegedly harbored a grudge against Hoffa over a prison dispute; and Salvatore Sallybugs Briguglio, one of Provenzano's enforcers. All three men supplied alibis that, while suspicious, proved difficult to definitively disprove. Investigators also zeroed in on Charles Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa's foster son and protege, whose whereabouts on the day of the disappearance were puzzling. A witness placed O'Brien in a car similar to the one Hoffa was allegedly last seen entering. When tested, the vehicle, which belonged to the son of a Detroit mobster, contained traces of Hoffa's hair and scent that was recognized by police dogs. Yet without a body or crime scene, these circumstantial connections remain just that: circumstantial. The investigation spread across multiple states. Agents drained lakes, dug up fields, and even excavated a swimming pool at a Michigan home. One persistent theory led investigators to examine trash incinerators and waste disposal sites in the Detroit area, working on the assumption that Hoffa's body had been promptly destroyed to eliminate evidence. By 1976, frustrated agents began exploring more exotic possibilities. Acting on a tip, the FBI even looked into whether Hoffa's body had been buried in the concrete foundation of New York's Giant Stadium during its construction, a theory that would become one of the most enduring urban legends about the case, despite later ground-penetrating radar tests disproving it. As the months turned into years, the investigation lost momentum. Key witnesses remained silent or provided contradictory information. Without a body, prosecutors couldn't move forward with murder charges against any suspects. The Hoffa family commissioned private investigations, offered rewards, and made public appeals, all to no avail. Popular theories and cultural impact. Few missing persons cases have embedded themselves in American popular culture like Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. The mystery transcended the crime itself to become a dark cultural touchstone, a shorthand for organized crime's shadow reach, and one of America's most enduring unsolved puzzles. In the absence of concrete answers, theories flourished, each more sensational than the last. The most persistent theory, and one given credence by serious investigators, suggests that Hoffa was killed the same day he disappeared, his body promptly disposed of in a mob-controlled funeral home or waste management facility. According to this scenario, Hoffa was lured to the meeting by people he trusted, murdered to prevent his return to Teamster leadership, and his remains destroyed in a facility equipped to handle human remains without questions. Then there's the infamous giant stadium theory, which claimed Hoffa was buried in the foundation or end zone of the football stadium during its construction. Though debunked by the FBI using ground-penetrating radar in the 1980s, the theory persisted so strongly that when the stadium was demolished in 2010, many expected, almost hoped, that Hoffa's remains would finally be discovered. Other theories have placed Hoffa's final resting place everywhere, from the Florida Everglades to a Michigan horse farm, from the bottom of the Great Lakes to an automotive compactor that reduced his body and car to an unrecognizable metal cube. Some speculation ventured into conspiracy territory, suggesting government involvement due to Hoffa's knowledge of sensitive information related to the Kennedy assassination or other political events. The cultural impact of Hoffa's disappearance has been equally far-reaching. Sleeping with the fishes, cement shoes, and jokes about Hoffa being buried under expressways or stadiums became commonplace in American humor, reflecting a cultural fascination with both organized crime and unsolved mysteries. References to Hoffa appeared in everything from The Simpsons to The Sopranos, cementing his status as the ultimate mob disappearance. Hollywood has repeatedly returned to Hoffa's story, most notably in the 1992 biopic Hoffa starring Jack Nicholson, and more recently in Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, which presented Frank Sheeran's confession as its narrative framework. These films further mythologized Hoffa in the public imagination, blurring the already indistinct line between historical fact and crime legend. The Hoffa case also fundamentally changed how missing persons cases involving organized crime were investigated. It demonstrated both the capabilities and limitations of federal law enforcement when confronting the wall of silence maintained by mob associates. The case highlighted the challenges of prosecuting organized crime without cooperative witnesses or physical evidence, lessons that would influence later RICO prosecutions and witness protection programs. The 2022 PJP landfill breakthrough. After decades of dead ends, 2022 brought what many investigators consider the most promising lead in the case's history. The breakthrough centered on the PJP landfill in Jersey City, New Jersey, a location long rumored in mob circles to be Hoffa's final resting place but never thoroughly investigated until recently. The site, colloquially known as Brother Moscato's dump after mobster Paul Moscato, who co-owned it, had been mentioned in mob circles since the 1970s. What made the 2022 investigation different was new corroborating testimony from multiple aging former associates who independently identified the same location, a level of convergence never before achieved in the case. Frank Coppola, the son of the landfill's other co-owner, provided a detailed deathbed confession in 2019 that reignited interest in the site. According to Coppola, his father was tasked with burying Hoffa's body, transported from Detroit in a 55-gallon drum under the landfill's dirt and garbage. What made Coppola's confession particularly compelling was the specificity of his claims. He identified a precise location and described an unusual burial method involving a metal drum being placed inside a larger container. "My father told me I couldn't even look at him, that's how badly they beat him," Coppola claimed, adding that his father had been ordered to bury the barrel by mob associates within 48 hours of Hoffa's disappearance. The timing aligned perfectly with the known timeline of events in Detroit. In 2022, the FBI, working with a team of forensic specialists, began conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys of the area Coppola had indicated before his own death in 2020. The landfill, which sits beneath a highway service road near the Pulaski Skyway, presented significant challenges. Decades of environmental remediation had altered the landscape, and the site contained hazardous materials requiring specialized handling. What caught investigators' attention was that the dump had been controlled by the Genovese crime family, the same organization that counted Anthony Provenzano among its members. The logistics of the theory made sense. Hoffa could have been killed in Michigan, transported to New Jersey, a trip that would take less than 24 hours by truck, and disposed of in a location where curious questions about unusual burial activities wouldn't be raised. Environmental data supported parts of Coppola's story. Records showed that the section of landfill he identified was actively receiving waste in July 1975, making it an ideal disposal site. Furthermore, records indicated that Paul Moscato, though primarily operating in New Jersey, had business connections to Detroit area sanitation companies linked to organized crime figures. The 2022 investigation employed technology unavailable in previous searches to trace evidence of human decomposition, tests that can identify human remains decades after burial. While the FBI maintained its characteristic silence about ongoing investigations, insiders familiar with the case described the PJP landfill evidence as the most promising lead in decades. Unlike previous searches based on single-source tips or general speculation, the 2022 investigation built upon multiple corroborating accounts and employed scientific methods to test a location that fit perfectly within the established timeline and known organized crime connections of the case. The Zilli revelation before the PJP landfill investigation renewed hope for solving the case. Another significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source in 2013. Anthony Tony Z. Zerilli, once the underboss of Detroit's organized crime family and one of the highest-ranking mobsters ever to break silence on the Hoffa disappearance. At 85 years old, facing financial troubles and with little time left, Zerilli came forward with a stunning claim. He knew where Jimmy Hoffa was buried. According to Zerilli, Hoffa was taken to a property in northern Oakland County, Michigan, about 20 miles from the Matches Red Fox restaurant where he was last seen. The property, a vacant 75-acre plot, had belonged to mob boss Jack Tocco's cousin. The plan was to take him to the property, Zerilli told journalists, and they buried him alive. That was not supposed to happen. According to Zerilli's account, Hoffa was meant to be held at the property temporarily while mob leaders decided his fate, but the plan went awry when those guarding him panicked and buried him in a shallow grave covered with a concrete slab. What made Zerilli's claims particularly credible was his position within the Detroit mob hierarchy. At the time of Hoffa's disappearance, Zerilli would have been informed about major operations, though he was actually in prison when Hoffa vanished. They couldn't have moved a finger without Tony Zerilli knowing about it, explained former U.S. Attorney Keith Corbett, who had prosecuted organized crime in Detroit for decades. Zerilli's motivations for coming forward remained somewhat murky. He claimed he wanted to give closure to Hoffa's family before his own death, but skeptics noted that he was also promoting a manuscript about his life in the mob. Nevertheless, the FBI took his information seriously enough to conduct a thorough search of the Oakland Township property in June 2013. For several days, federal agents and forensic anthropologists carefully excavated the site where Zerilli claimed Hoffa was buried. The search generated tremendous media attention, with helicopters circling overhead and dozens of reporters stationed along the rural road leading to the property. Despite the extensive effort, which cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, no human remains were discovered. The failure of the Zerilli-led search dampened hopes, but it didn't entirely discredit his information. Some investigators speculated that remains might have been moved in the decades since 1975, or that Zerilli, relying on second-hand information while he was incarcerated, might have identified the wrong section of the large property. What remained significant about Zerilli's testimony was his clear implication of specific Detroit mob figures in the killing, most notably Jack Tocco and his brother Anthony, who had long been suspected but never directly accused by someone of Zerilli's stature. Though he passed away in 2015, Zerilli's decision to break the mob's code of silence represented a critical crack in the wall that had protected Hoffa's killers for decades. DNA technology and modern forensic approaches. The Hoffa investigation has evolved alongside forensic science itself, with each technological breakthrough offering new hope for resolving the decades-old mystery. When Hoffa disappeared in 1975, DNA testing didn't exist in criminal investigations, fingerprint analysis was largely manual, and computer databases were in their infancy. Today, the case benefits from revolutionary advances that have transformed cold case methodologies. Modern DNA analysis has become the game changer in the Hoffa investigation. Unlike conventional DNA testing that requires substantial biological material, current techniques can detect DNA from microscopic samples and highly degraded remains. Touch DNA analysis can potentially identify genetic material from something as minimal as skin cells left on an object Hoffa contacted on his final day, like the car he was last seen entering or items from the restaurant. In recent years, investigators have quietly collected DNA samples from Hoffa family members to create a comprehensive genetic profile. This reference DNA allows for rapid identification should remains ever be discovered. It also permits familial DNA matching, where even partial genetic material from degraded remains could be positively linked to Hoffa through his biological relatives. Ground-penetrating radar (GPR) technology has revolutionized the search for clandestine graves. Unlike the crude metal detectors used in early searches, modern GPR can create detailed subsurface maps showing anomalies consistent with disturbed soil, buried objects, or human remains, even decades after burial. The 2022 PJP landfill investigation employed advanced GPR systems capable of penetrating various soil compositions and differentiating between natural features and human-made disturbances. Perhaps most promising are the advances in chemical detection methods. Specialized devices can now detect trace amounts of decomposition products that remain in soil for decades after a body has completely decomposed. These volatile organic compounds create a chemical signature that sophisticated sensors can identify even when no visible remains exist. When combined with isotope analysis of soil samples, investigators can potentially confirm the presence of human remains at a site, even if those remains have completely decomposed. Digital forensics has also transformed the case. The FBI has digitized thousands of documents, witness statements, and leads from the original investigation, allowing powerful analytics software to find connections and patterns that human investigators might miss. Artificial intelligence programs can now analyze this vast database to identify inconsistencies in witness statements or generate new investigative approaches based on previously overlooked connections. The Hoffa investigation has also benefited from advances in behavioral analysis. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit has applied modern criminal profiling techniques to the case, creating detailed psychological assessments of key suspects and witnesses that help contextualize their actions and statements. This approach has helped investigators better understand the reliability of recent confessions and testimonies from aging associates. These scientific advances have coincided with a generational shift in organized crime's code of silence. As the participants in 1970s mob activities age and die, traditional omerta has weakened. Family members of deceased mob figures, no longer fearing reprisals, have become more willing to share information passed down about Hoffa's fate. Combined with the advanced forensic techniques, this sociological change has created the most promising investigative environment since the case began. The Detroit house excavation in 2013, while the Zerilli-prompted search was capturing headlines, a far less publicized but equally intriguing investigation was unfolding at a modest home on Florida Street in Detroit's northwest side. This search stemmed from a different source altogether. A deathbed confession from a man with no known mob ties, but a compelling story that caught investigators' attention. The tip came from the dying words of Donovan Wells, who had once lived at the address. Before passing away in 2004, Wells told the FBI that he had witnessed suspicious activity at the house the day after Hoffa disappeared. According to Wells, several men spent hours in the garage and driveway before departing, and the home's driveway was inexplicably replaced shortly afterward. What made Wells's information particularly interesting was that the home had belonged to a man connected to both the Teamsters and Detroit organized crime figures. It was located just 18 miles from where Hoffa was last seen, close enough to have been a practical location for a hurried disposal, but far enough to avoid immediate police attention. In July 2013, forensic teams arrived at the unassuming bungalow, surprising the current homeowner who had no connection to the events of 1975. Investigators removed concrete from the driveway and used ground-penetrating radar to examine the home's foundation and the soil beneath the garage. They drilled core samples from areas where the radar indicated anomalies, testing for human decomposition products. The media presence was deliberately minimized, unlike the highly public Oakland Township dig, allowing investigators to work methodically without the pressure of constant public scrutiny. For 2 days, teams extracted soil samples and analyzed the property's construction history to determine if alterations had been made around the time of Hoffa's disappearance. Though the search ultimately yielded no human remains, investigators discovered evidence that the driveway had indeed been replaced in the late summer of 1975, providing at least partial corroboration of Wells' story. Soil analysis revealed unusual chemical compositions consistent with accelerated decomposition, though not definitively human in origin. The Florida Street investigation highlighted a critical aspect of the modern Hoffa investigation: the parallel pursuit of multiple credible theories. Rather than focusing exclusively on high-profile leads, the FBI had developed a more nuanced approach, simultaneously investigating several potential burial sites based on their individual merits. Other recent search locations have included a Milford Township horse farm excavated in 2006 based on information from Hoffa associate Richard the Iceman Kuklinski, and a wooded area in Oakland County identified through an anonymous tip in 2010. Each search, while unsuccessful in locating remains, has helped investigators narrow the range of possibilities and eliminate certain scenarios from consideration. The Frank Sheeran connection. Few claims about Hoffa's disappearance have generated as much controversy or public fascination as those made by Frank the Irishman Sheeran, a Teamsters official, reputed hitman for the Bufalino crime family, and one-time Hoffa ally. Sheeran confessed in the final years of his life to being the man who actually pulled the trigger on Jimmy Hoffa. Sheeran's story, detailed in Charles Brandt's 2004 book I Heard You Paint Houses and later adapted into Martin Scorsese's film The Irishman, presents a version of events that differs significantly from other accounts. According to Sheeran, he personally lured Hoffa to a meeting at a Detroit house where he shot him twice in the back of the head. The confession included specific details: the house on Lafayette Boulevard, how he positioned himself behind Hoffa, and how the body was then cremated at a funeral home to destroy evidence. What makes Sheeran's confession compelling is his close relationship with Hoffa. Unlike many who claimed knowledge of the disappearance, Sheeran was undeniably part of Hoffa's inner circle and was trusted by the former Teamsters president. Phone records confirm the two men spoke earlier on the day Hoffa vanished. Additionally, Sheeran had connections to both the Detroit and Pennsylvania crime families alleged to have orchestrated the killing. However, significant evidence contradicts Sheeran's account. When the FBI searched the house he identified in 2004, forensic teams found blood traces on the floorboards, but DNA testing proved they weren't Hoffa's. Crime scene experts have questioned whether the killing could have been carried out as described without leaving more evidence, and several mob historians have dismissed Sheeran's confession as an attention-seeking fabrication from an aging criminal seeking notoriety. Despite these inconsistencies, Sheeran's claimed involvement cannot be entirely dismissed. Some investigators believe his confession contains elements of truth mixed with deliberate misdirection, a common tactic among organized crime figures who want to unburden themselves while still protecting others or concealing certain details. What's particularly notable about Sheeran's story is how it conflicts with other credible accounts. While Sheeran claimed Hoffa was killed in Detroit and his body cremated, the Zerilli account placed the burial in Oakland Township, and newer evidence points to the New Jersey landfill. These contradictions highlight the fundamental challenge of the Hoffa investigation, separating reliable information from self-serving fabrications among people with reasons to to both reveal and conceal the truth. The popularization of Sheeran's account through Scorsese's high-profile film has complicated matters further, embedding his version of events in the public consciousness regardless of its factual accuracy. For many Americans, the cinematically rendered confession has become the default narrative despite serious questions about its veracity. Investigators have adopted a balanced approach to Sheeran's claims, acknowledging his proximity to the events while subjecting his specific allegations to the same rigorous scrutiny applied to other leads. While certain aspects of his confession have been disproven, others, particularly regarding the motivation for Hoffa's killing and the panic his comeback attempt created in organized crime circles, align with what other sources have revealed. New witness testimonies. As the generation directly involved in Hoffa's disappearance reaches their final years, a remarkable phenomenon has emerged: the deathbed confession. Since 2010, multiple aging organized crime associates, Teamsters officials, and peripheral figures have come forward with information they've held secret for decades. These 11th-hour revelations have injected new energy into the investigation while presenting investigators with complex questions about credibility and motivation. One significant testimony came from Marvin Elkind, a former driver for Hoffa who later became an informant. Elkind revealed conversations he overheard at a 1975 Teamsters gathering in Detroit where mob figures allegedly discussed killing Hoffa and disposing of his body through a mob-controlled fat-rendering plant that would leave no traces. While Elkind wasn't directly involved in the disappearance, his account aligned with the long-standing theory that Hoffa's body was destroyed rather than buried. In 2018, Philip Moscato Jr., son of the New Jersey dump owner, linked to the PJP landfill theory, shared conversations with his father that implicated Salvatore "Sally Bugs" Briguglio as Hoffa's actual killer. According to Moscato Jr., his father confirmed that Hoffa's body was initially transported to New Jersey in a 55-gallon drum before burial at the landfill, a claim that closely matched Frank Coppola's later independent account. Perhaps most tantalizing are the testimonies from peripheral witnesses who observed unusual activities without understanding their significance at the time. A former truck driver came forward in 2019 claiming he observed a suspicious middle-of-the-night concrete pour at a Detroit construction site the day after Hoffa disappeared, a job that seemed rushed and was conducted under unusual security. This aligned with long-standing rumors about Hoffa being buried beneath a construction project. Other recent accounts have come from unexpected sources. The daughter of a deceased organized crime figure from Pennsylvania revealed that her father had admitted to involvement in the logistics of transporting Hoffa's body. A former bartender at a mob-connected establishment in Detroit shared overhearing conversations about Hoffa being taken care of hours before his disappearance was publicly known. What makes these recent testimonies collectively significant is their convergence around certain key elements. Multiple independent accounts now place Hoffa's remains in New Jersey rather than Michigan. Several testimonies corroborate the involvement of Provenzano's crew in the actual killing, and numerous accounts confirm that the motivation centered on preventing Hoffa's return to Teamsters leadership. Investigators have developed sophisticated protocols for evaluating these late-breaking testimonies. They look for details that weren't publicly known but can be verified, consistency with established timeline evidence, and information that the witness would have been uniquely positioned to know. They also consider potential motivations, from seeking notoriety to unburdening consciences to financial gain through books or interviews. The aging demographic of potential witnesses has created a sense of urgency among investigators. With each passing year, more individuals with first-hand knowledge of the events surrounding Hoffa's disappearance die, taking their secrets to the grave. This reality has prompted a more aggressive approach to following up on even partial information from elderly sources, recognizing that the window for first-hand accounts is rapidly closing. Why the case matters today. Almost 5 decades after Jimmy Hoffa vanished, it's reasonable to ask why substantial resources continue to be devoted to solving this cold case. With the primary suspects long deceased and the statute of limitations expired on most related crimes, what compelling interest remains in determining Hoffa's fate? The answer lies partly in the case's unique position at the intersection of American labor history, organized crime, and political power. Hoffa's disappearance wasn't merely a murder, it represented the violent collision of legitimate and illegitimate power structures that shaped much of 20th century America. Resolving the case would illuminate not just a single crime, but an entire era of American history when the boundaries between union activity, business interests, political influence, and organized crime were disturbingly fluid. For law enforcement, the Hoffa case remains the most high-profile, unsolved disappearance in FBI history, a persistent challenge to the Bureau's investigative capabilities and a symbolic open wound in its institutional legacy. Solving the case would demonstrate that with sufficient persistence and advancing technology, even the most carefully concealed crimes eventually yield their secrets. The case also maintains practical relevance for modern organized crime investigations. The techniques used to eliminate Hoffa and conceal his fate established a template that crime organizations would follow for decades. Understanding precisely how Hoffa's disappearance was orchestrated and concealed provides valuable insights into how organized crime operates in its most sensitive operations. For the Hoffa family, the need for resolution is deeply personal and unchanging. Hoffa's daughter, Barbara Qaunta, and son, James P. Hoffa, who followed his father's footsteps to become Teamsters president, have never abandoned their quest for answers about their father's fate. Their persistence represents the enduring human need for closure and truth that transcends legal technicalities or practical considerations. Beyond these specific stakeholders, the Hoffa mystery endures as a case study in American mythology, our collective fascination with unsolved mysteries and the dark undercurrents of power. Like the Kennedy assassination or the identity of the Zodiac killer, the Hoffa case represents unfinished business in our national narrative, a story without a proper ending that continues to demand resolution.